What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to Hobby Harvest. For those of you who are new here, my name is Ken. Welcome. So today I want to talk to you guys about shrubs. We're going to talk about why they're useful, and then we're going to talk about how to get them established later in the video. So I'm talking about things like red osier dogwood, yellow twig dogwood, anything like willows, or even trees like box elders. Now, those are all trees and shrubs that are going to grow here on my southeastern Wisconsin property. On my northwestern Wisconsin property, we have a little bit of a different ecosystem up there, so I'll talk about those things again later in the video. But since I'm down here in southeastern Wisconsin right now, I'm going to talk about the shrubs that are native to this area. So what I have behind me here is red osier dogwood, and you can see that's probably the smaller, like thicker stuff that's right here. And then these trees up here are box elders, and there's some smaller box elders growing in here too. It's probably pretty hard to see. But why we want shrubs on our property is for a couple reasons. First off, we can use them for screening. So I talk a lot about screening. I just did a switchgrass video last week of how we use switchgrass for screening, but I like to complement them together. So you guys can see here, there is some switchgrass down here, but I put switchgrass first, and then I have my shrubs on the next layer coming off of my food plot. So you guys are actually standing on the food plot right now, looking off into my screening on the side of it. And so that shrub layer or that tree layer is sort of that second layer, and you guys can see it's January and you can barely see through this shrub layer. It's just so thick. There's just so many branches in the way that you can't see through it. So it creates this great screening even in the middle of winter. It is warm out here, so I'm out here without a hat or gloves, just in a hoodie, but we are having a warm spell right now. But it is a great thing to complement your switchgrass layer, is that shrub layer before you head off into the woods or wherever else you're trying to screen from, be it maybe your access or a house or something of that nature, a road or whatever. But that second added layer of screening is just awesome. It really helps to emphasize that blocking out of those sight lines on your property around things like your food plots and your access trails, or just where your stand itself is. So like I said here, a great shrub to use is red osier dogwood, yellow twig dogwood, willow, box elder. They all have something in common in that they are very tender for the deer too. So deer will browse on them, especially in the winter when the food sources in the area naturally diminish during the winter and they're looking for just anything to eat. They are going to browse on those shrub layers also. So it's just an extra layer of food and of increase in the natural habitat if you improve how many shrubs are on your property, so that you're providing additional food to help those deer through the winter, which is going to get you more deer, more bucks, more bigger bucks year after year after year if you give them more of that stuff to help them through the winter. Now, we can also use shrubs not just for screening, but also create bedding areas with shrubs. So when we think of bedding areas, deer don't need a ton of like overhead cover, like big mature trees. They're very capable of handling whatever Mother Nature throws at them. But what they need is that side cover so that they can't actually see off into the woods and the woods can't see them, so that they can stay hidden in those nice thick pockets. And so we can create those nice thick pockets with things like shrubs. So putting those shrubs on your property in like pockets for bedding, and I talk a lot on this channel about creating pockets of bedding or compartmentalizing your food sources and your bedding sources so they're not just all one big lump together, because then you can set different groups of deer in each of those pockets, and it is very advantageous creating a property that can hold a much larger number of deer that way, because they're not all right on top of each other in like one big bedding area and then going to one big food source. They can kind of each claim their own space on your property when you do that. So it is definitely worthwhile to put in some additional bedding pockets with things like shrubs. And I'll show you guys what that should look like. When you have these bedding areas, they should be very thick. Now here on this specific property, this is an old paintball field, so there's a lot of like pallets and stuff that were left that were like bunkers for when it was a paintball field, but I left them and let the shrubs kind of overgrow and claim them. And so that did a couple things too. First off, it helped those shrubs to get established and grow, because it kind of like held them in place and like didn't let something just roll over them and knock them down when they were small. but it also adds to that habitat because those pallets that are still standing up are providing a screening themselves in that you can't see through them. But they are also very, very good at creating habitat for things like rabbits. There's just so much rabbit sign amongst all of these shrubs, this switchgrass, and these pallets that are just kind of left in here. And they create just this awesome, diverse habitat for all sorts of critters, not just the deer. But like I was saying, you can use these shrubs for both screening, so you can't see through them, and you would want to do that in a lot thinner layers because you wouldn't want to create a thick layer of shrubs as a screen because it could turn into a bedding area for you. And then so that leads me into how you create a bedding area. You just create a thicker stand of these shrubs so that the deer can kind of get in there and feel safe in there. You got to think too, like these doe family groups and then even these buck groups are about to start getting back into their bachelor groups heading forward. Like I said, we're in January, so as we head into February, you're going to start seeing on your cameras, if you left them out, a lot more bucks walking together in those bachelor groups. But you want to think when you're creating this bedding that this bedding area can hold, say, 3, 5, 6, 8 deer in one bedding area if it is a doe family group that herds back up in the winter and tries to bed in that area. And now the bucks will kind of do that too, but the bucks do kind of claim, I like to call it their own bedroom when they bed down. So even though those bucks will form up into those bachelor groups for the majority of the year, when they bed down, they are still not like sitting right next to each other. So like if you find a doe bed with 2 fawn beds, they'll be like almost touching each other when they're laying down during the day when they're using those bedding areas. But when you find buck beds, it's usually a solo bed by itself, unless you kind of wander off maybe up to 100 yards away in any direction, you find another solo bed. Well, that's that other buck that they're running together in a bachelor group, but they don't actually sit like right next to each other when they bed down. So just something to keep in mind when you're trying to artificially create these bedding areas of like how the deer naturally use bedding, and then how to create that bedding where you might get bucks to bed in it or does to bed in it. And I should preface this a lot. You see a ton of videos on like creating buck bedding and how to create awesome buck bedding, and getting a buck or a doe to bed in a certain location has nothing to do with the bed itself. It has to do with the relation to food. So when you have a food plot, the closest layer of bedding, that's where all your does and fawns are going to bed down. And anywhere that you have snow, so like here in Wisconsin where we have snow, it's easy to like walk off into the woods once hunting season's done. You're not worried about spooking deer anymore, and you can go see that first layer of bedding adjacent to your food sources. It's got that doe bed in it with those 2 smaller fawn beds in it if she had twins, and maybe there's a couple other beds, so maybe you have 5, 6, 7, 8 beds in that first layer. And then as you walk further off and you get to that like next layer of bedding, that's where you're going to start seeing maybe 3 big beds. Maybe those were 3 like 1.5-year-old bucks bedded down there, maybe a nubbin buck and like a 1.5-year-old, whatever. And then if you can go further and further off, and sometimes this is really far away, so if you guys especially aren't seeing your big mature bucks until after dark, they might be bedded really, really far away in wherever that 3rd layer of bedding or that 3rd pocket of bedding is. And that's why they're not getting to you, to your food sources, or to whatever other attractions you have before it gets dark, because they have to come from such a far ways away. So if you create those layers of bedding closer to your food plots, or you create more layers of bedding kind of compartmentalized and still separate but closer to your attractions, you're going to get those bucks to you before dark, and you're going to especially get those mature bucks to you before dark. Not every night, you know, anything can happen when they're wandering through the woods. They hear a noise, they smell a smell, or they see a flicker of something, like that'll slow them down and they might wander the other way or run off. I've, for the most part, had does that I can set my watch to that they will be on my food plot every single night an hour before dark. And every once in a while when I'm sitting, they don't show up. Well, it's because something happened. The one night I actually saw what happened. They came running from where they usually walk in from, and instead of coming to the food plot, they ran off into the neighbor's field. And I was like, well, what's going on? Is there a buck chasing them? You know, wasn't quite sure, so I was just watching, and out come 2 coyotes chasing them. So something can happen, you know, a predator could be chasing them or whatever, and it's just something that might throw them off from their normal pattern. So don't just assume that because you do all of this work, you can like set the date and time that you're going to harvest whichever deer you want to. So it's just upping your odds. And that's what we're doing with all of these habitat improvements, just increasing your odds to the point that once we've done it enough, you'll see success every single year. As long as you set that level of success at something that is attainable for your specific property. All right, we can move on to like, well, how do we actually establish these things, right? Well, I want to take you guys over to the other side of my food plot where last year, those of you who follow the channel, I reshaped this food plot, and by doing that, I needed to take what was part of the food plot last year and turn it into shrubs and growth. So I did a lot to improve that part of the property. I'll take you guys over there and show you right now. All right, and so now I got you guys over here where I basically changed this whole area from just being a flat, barren food plot last spring into an area of a lot of natural growth, and a lot of shrubs and stuff were planted here too. So I want to kind of tell you how I did that. Now this is just 1 year of it being transformed this way. I was fully set for it to take me years to get this fully established how I want. Now this box elder right here, this mature box elder, used to be on the edge of the food plot, and now everything I'm standing in here is the regeneration and the transplants and the clones and everything else I put in here. So I'm gonna get into how I did all of that now. So what I did was I took a lot of red osier dogwood clippings and I plugged them into the dirt here. And I would say maybe 50% of them took off. So this isn't as wet as I would have liked it to be for ideally cloning red osier dogwood, but I still had a decent growth here. And the other thing though that I did is I transplanted a lot of smaller red osier dogwood plants as well, and those really took off in here as well. I also brought in some box elder trees. You guys can see this one here. I transplanted this one, and of course a buck decided he wanted to rub on it. So that's great and all for having buck activity in the area, but now I'm hoping he didn't actually kill that tree, because it was a nice tree to transplant and now it might be dead, and now I'm not gonna get that extra growth out of it. But this whole area I filled in with red osier dogwood, yellow twig dogwood, box elders. I also threw down a lot of box elder seeds in here. All I did was like pull those out of my gutters at home. I have box elders along the back wood line by my house, and in the fall those seed pods all like blow into my gutters. So when I clean out my gutters, I save them and I just bring them and throw them out here. Now that was last year. I wasn't expecting too much growth out of them, but now that they've gone through a whole nother winter out here, I'm gonna be eager to see if this spring I start to see some of them popping up in here as well. So just to recap, I cloned red osier dogwoods and I plucked them into the ground. So when you cut those off of the branch, you want to cut them at like a 45-degree angle, and then you want to shove them at least a third of the stalk length into the ground. So you don't want to just put them a little bit into the ground, get them really deep into the ground. So you're going to want to do that when the ground's not frozen. Around March, April, if we get like a decent thaw that the ground isn't frozen, that's a great time to do that. You have to clip them when they're dormant, but then get them in the ground, and then whatever part of them is touching the ground will grow root, and whatever part is exposed to the air will grow out leaves. So that's a great, cheap, easy way to get shrubs established on your property. Now that is going to take years to get those big and tall, 6+ feet tall, growing and established as both bedding and a screen for you. But like I said, the other thing I did is I complemented this area by transplanting already started red osier dogwood, yellow twig dogwood. I think I threw a couple willows in here. I'm looking around, see what I can see is growing this time of year. It's not growing, but I can see the stalks, and a lot of the other native vegetation did pop up in here, but I also transplanted some box elder trees in here that were already started. And like I said, I threw down box elder seeds in here as well. So I really gave this area a nice start to become established as a nice edge for my food plot. And I guess I'll go back and say why I reshaped this food plot. So this food plot used to be sort of like a big triangle, and I wanted to shape it more into like a boomerang shape, like I always talk about on my channel. So I kind of took the middle of that triangle out and punched it in a little bit to create more of a boomerang shape. And so I'm standing now in that part of the food plot that I'm trying to turn into shrubs and stuff. And even though this stuff hasn't grown up that much, it's still working very well because there's a lot of native vegetation and stuff in here. and I can see all the deer tracks right along the edge of this. So even though they can still see through this fairly decently, and the browse isn't here for them, and it's not 100% working how I wanted it to, they are definitely walking the edge of it, which is exactly what I wanted them to do when I created this in the first place, was to be able to make them move where I wanted them to move. And so the reason for that being is where the point or the tip of this regrowth that I'm trying to create here is right where I have a 20-yard shot from my stand location as well. So as they crest the middle of the food plot, they are right within 20 or less yards from the stand. So that's great for a bow shot from there. And obviously they can come closer than that, but this pretty much pushes them that they're forced to walk within 20 yards of me if they want to walk from one side of the food plot to the other. And because deer love edge, they love following this edge of shrubs that I put in here, and that's where they follow it. And of course that puts them right where I have a shot on them if I want to take one. So just huge advantage to being able to like modify your natural habitat with shrubs and stuff this way to put deer where you want them to go, or to like cut down on sight lines, also give them additional browse, again, give them additional places to rub as well, I guess. And like I said, I hope that that one is not dead, but it is what happens. They love to rub on these shrubs and stuff as well. So you are going to possibly create like a scrape line on the edge of it, or a rub line where these bucks are going to come in and they just love rubbing their antlers and scraping next to these types of shrubs also. So all the more reason to put this kind of stuff on your land and really take full advantage of it. So like I said, these shrubs are awesome for being able to screen areas, cut down on those sight lines. I talk a lot about cutting down on those sight lines. We always see deer in the thickest part of the woods, and there's a reason for that, and that is that deer love to be hidden everywhere they move. They don't like all these sight lines being able to hit them from all over your property. So the more you can do to cut down on those sight lines by utilizing switchgrass and shrubs and trees, and I mean, we can talk about using conifers and stuff too, but the problem with conifers, so pines and spruce, is that deer don't feed on them. So there's a huge advantage to using these shrubs over using the conifers, because the deer will actually feed on these as well, and you help give them that extra food source to like get them through the winter, or to give them that daytime browse in their bedding areas. So just something to think about. It is awesome to throw these shrubs on your land, awesome to get all of this nice young tender growth out there. The deer absolutely love it. They will flock to it for all of the reasons that I talked about. And now I want to quickly talk about my northwestern Wisconsin property, because the species of plant up there are just a little bit different. So in the big woods up north, one of the easiest things to do to get all of that nice young tender growth to the ground is just get rid of canopy. So you go out there with a chainsaw. If you're not comfortable using a chainsaw, hire somebody to do it, or you could even have part of your property logged off if that's something you want to do. You get some money back that way. But you want to drop those big canopy trees to get more sunlight down to the forest floor. And if you can do that, it will just naturally regenerate. So this is why we call a lot of this regeneration or regenerative growth, because once these things start to flourish, they will fill in really super thick close to the ground, and that's what the deer need. They don't need that tree canopy way over their head. They need all of this cover down at their height so that they can browse on it and use it for cover. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're in that like big wood setting. Now the other thing you can do is, if you have aspens or popples or whatever, if you cut those off completely and just drop them and use them for firewood or use them for pulpwood for the lumber company or whatever, but if you drop those, their root system will like get set on fire, and it will ignite and shoot up sprouts all over it. You'll have all of these little popple trees, all these little aspen trees growing all over wherever that root system went, and that puts a ton of stems really close to the ground. So that's a great way to get more stems to the ground too on your property, and especially because it's also going to get rid of that high canopy of those big mature aspen or popple trees, and so it kind of works like double for you. Now the other thing on up north there is that like tag alder is a great species too. Again, it's that you're just looking for any shrub or tree or plant that doesn't really grow super tall. It maybe only grows 10, 12, 15 feet tall or whatever, but it has a lot of stems really close to the ground. those are what you're trying to get growing on your property because they really cut down on those sight lines. Deer love them for cover. And the other thing is you're looking for things that have like really tender branches. So like red osier dogwood, if you've ever split it open, it's almost like really spongy on the inside, and then the skin or the bark is very soft as well. So deer love to browse on that. Now, if you don't have that, the deer are still gonna browse on like the little tender tips of things that they have growing near them. So that's why we wanna get as much as we can close to the ground so that they browse on those tender tips. So just something to give you guys an idea about if you guys want to do this on your property. Like I said, it's very good for using for screening, cutting down those sight lines, which deer absolutely love. They love to be in thick areas of the woods, so create those thick areas, use them to complement your things like your food sources, your food plots, and the deer are going to flock to those areas of your property. And then also use them to create bedding areas because those deer want to be in those thick, gnarly, high stem count areas when they're bedded down. So if you guys feel like you got some value out of this video, please do me a favor, go ahead, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave me a comment below, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.